Good afternoon, friends. Happy Labor Day. Slash, it's happy because I'm not at work. What we're doing here today, if he starts to look at this, he's murdered this plant. It's hanging on by a thread, but he might interrupt us, so I don't know why I'm explaining. You know about this cat by now. Hey! Stop! I should have brought my spray bottle. So what we're doing here today is similar to what I did back in April, maybe it was April, where I talked about my 5 and 4.5 star reads up through that period of time. I'm going to be talking about my summer 5-star reads and 4.5 as well. For me, I feel like doing monthly wrap-ups is just too much. I read too many books every month. It's exhausting. I don't like having to pull the books off the shelf, but picking a select few that I really loved and talking about those every 3 months, that's doable for me. So we're gonna do that. And I'm gonna talk about the books I've most recently talked about first. And they're all mostly in the same genre. So if you don't want to hear about them again, I'll understand. You can scroll on through. I'm gonna try and figure out how to put chapters. I haven't been able to figure that out so far. I'll probably look it up while I make this video. If it seems too hard, I might not do it. But for the future, I'll try to make sure that's a thing that happens. I am gonna also try to say different things about these books that you've recently heard me talk about, so you don't get sick of hearing the same spiel for every book every time, because that's something that I don't really like. I always skip. If a YouTuber has a specific spiel for a series or a book, skip. I don't need to hear it 5,000 times, especially if I've read the book. But even if I haven't, I don't need to hear it again. That was fuzzy. So first up, I'm gonna do these by category. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because nearly all of the books you've recently heard me talk about are in fantasy. So we're gonna do horror and then fantasy. And then I've got a romance, 2 nonfiction books, a mystery thriller and a mystery. And then I have a contemporary young adult novel and a science fiction. So we're gonna get the fantasy out of the way first because that's what you will have heard the most from me. So first up is horror. The one and only horror novel that I gave 5 or 4.5 stars, but in this case full 5 to, is The Good House by Tananarive Due. I did finally manage to track down a copy, and I used my points at Barnes & Noble so I didn't have to pay the actual exorbitant price of this paperback copy. I really wish that they would give this a little makeover and remarket it, because it deserves to be read more, and B, I mean, this is I kind of like it. The more I look at it, it's growing on me. I like but it also is just really dated. It's a 20-plus-year-old book cover, and it needs an update. And people need to know about it because it was really good, because I gave it 5 stars. So I know I've said in the past, this is a haunted house story, but it is like of the epic horror genre. Like if you have an epic fantasy, this would be like epic horror, in that it takes place across a long period of time with long range ramifications. And it also does have like an actual paranormal element. Like it's not psychological horror-ish in the sense that there's nothing supernatural going on. There's definite supernatural stuff going on here. There are spirits and ghosts and other things happening. But overall, this is a book about 3 generations of one family, with the main focus on the main character, whose name is Angela. But it also focuses on her son, Corey, who is killed on the 4th of July, 2 years before the main narrative picks up. And it also focuses on her great-grandmother, who left her the house when she died, and her great-grandmother, and how she became a really important person in this town, and how she's connected to the supernatural. So we follow all 3 of those timelines, and it was just really affecting. Like it just, because we spend so much time with these characters, literally because it's a big book, it's 500 pages, but also figuratively because we just get in their heads. And something I haven't talked about previously in regards to this book is the way that it deals with young Black manhood. So there's actually a really interesting article on Tor.com written by Nisi Shawl about this book that I will link down below, that I found a really interesting read. She talks about the cathartic power of Tananarive Due's endings, And that's also something I have not yet mentioned, is that this book has one of the most satisfying endings. Pippin, get down. I'm just gonna hold him until he forgets what he wanted. That's the only thing that works. Okay, anyway, as I was saying, this book has one of the most cathartic and satisfying endings in a horror book that I've ever read. So as much as I love Stephen King, his endings are like 50-50 for me. Either they're very satisfying or they're very not satisfying. And this was so satisfying. Minor spoilers. The reason that it is satisfying is that everything isn't bleak. There's a happy-ish ending. And it worked so well. So like, not only does this give you the creeps and the chills and the terrors, and it gets really deep into people's emotions and is a good character study, but it also then turns right around and brings it all together with a really good ending. So I seriously recommend that you guys check this out, maybe even if you don't like horror, because it's just such a good story. And that's me. I will stop. Okay, Pippin. Now on to fantasy. So you will have recently heard me talk about most of these books, but we're gonna talk about them again. Pippin, don't. Hold on. I'm gonna turn on his toy. There you go. Okay, so apologize if you can hear a bell jingling in the background and like banging, but I bought Pippin this robot thing that rolls around my house and dangles a feather and a bird that I just put on it that has a jingly bell because it occupies him and it goes all around the house so that I don't have to deal with him when he's in goblin mode. I have 7 fantasy books to talk about, so I'm not going to go too in depth on these because I don't want this video to be bajillion years long. So first up is The Shadow Cabinet by Juno Dawson. I did end up rounding this up to 5 stars because just like the longer I've thought about it, the more I like it, and I want to reread the first 2 books in the series before book 3 comes out next year. And some of you may have noticed my edges are no longer pink, and that is because I have completed the swap. I think I mentioned in a past video that I was also buying the Fairy Loot edition so that I could swap the Waterstones cover for the Fairy Loot cover, keep the Fairy Loot edition, and then I was going to sell the hybrid monstrosity that resulted from the other book with the Waterstones pink sprayed edges copy and the Fairy Loot purple cover. But this is why I wanted the Fairy Loot edition, because it's got these gorgeous like insets on and it has the other Rick too, so I needed them to match, and it also has the sprayed edges. I think it's in Latin, I'm not sure what it says. Tuum animum salve. Your spirit answers? I don't know. I spent a long time since I took Latin. But anyway, so while I'm putting this cover back on, so I did end up, like I said, rounding this up to 5 stars, even though it's technically a 4.5 star book. So this series, if you're not aware, I'm not going to actually talk about this one because it's the second book in a series, but the first book follows, which is called Her Majesty's Royal Coven, follows a coven of witches as they are in their adulthood, and they're like encountering each other again in adulthood in a significant way for the first time. Some of them have remained close and some of them have drifted. And Her Majesty's Royal Coven is an institution of witches who have like a secret witch government set up by Anne Boleyn. They work on behalf of Queen and Country, or King and Country. Although it never changes names, like to His Majesty's Royal Coven, because King Charles is in this one instead of Queen Elizabeth, because of Anne Boleyn, because it's her coven. Anyway, so the main conflict of this series is the old guard versus the new guard, and how hard it is to be an ethical witch in the modern world, and the challenges that people are up against. And it is very pro-diversity, it's very sex positive, very trans positive. The author is a trans woman, Juno, and she has been very open about her experience as a trans woman living in England. And so this series is kind of like a big middle finger to J.K. Rowling is what it really is, which I enjoy. Well, it makes me sad, but I enjoy the book because it's just sort of like a beacon in the night for the rights of all kinds of different witches / ladies. I don't want to say too much about it, but it's very, like, the voice of this series made me make the first book 4 stars, but I hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. And then this book just pushed me over the edge, and now it's like one of my favorite series. And I feel like if I reread, I am going to bump up both books to 5 stars. But this was the author's first adult novel and first adult fantasy. So I feel like there was just a little bit of room to grow. But I really recommend this series, and I cannot wait for book 3. Next up, another book I'm sure you will recognize because I talked about it a bunch, and that is The Spirit Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. So this is a very complicated, very strange, very beautiful book about 2 young boys in this fictional country who are tasked with bringing a captured old god somewhere. I'm not going to tell you where. But the real, I mean, it's very mythological, but the real joy of this book is in the style that it's written in and the structure. It's like a Matryoshka doll. So there's a story, and then there's a story within that story, literally. Somebody's being told a story, and then the main character is inside that story, and then while being inside that story is being told another story. So it's a little bit disorienting at first, but once you get in the flow of it, it's so absorbing. And I loved all the characters. I loved the mythology, the world that's been created. So like if you can picture, I don't know how they did this, but if you can picture the written word version of this beautiful creation, that is the book. And it is, I don't want to say too much because I want you guys to go in and experience it for yourself. But if you like fantasy, if you like books that get a little bit experimental with structure, if you love beautiful writing that isn't purple, very hard to find, that's very emotionally affecting, highly recommend this book. Cannot recommend it highly enough. As of right now, it is in my top 5 books of the year, which is a high bar to clear, as I've read 243 books as of this morning. So, top 5 of 243 is high praise. Okay, so next up is The Will of the Many by James Islington. I never looked up how to say his name. I have a problem with pre-video research apparently. But this is the first book in a trilogy called The Hierarchy. It is an epic fantasy book that is inspired by the Romans, but not in a way that's like pro-Roman, pro-Empire, the very opposite in fact. And that's all couched in a story of this young orphan boy whose family was killed by the Hierarchy, which is the Empire in this. And he is secretly the prince of a deposed royal family, the only surviving member of his family, and he's just trying to survive when he's adopted by a pretty high-ranking member of the Hierarchy and asked to infiltrate a military school of magic essentially, in order to accomplish some goals. So he's a little bit neutral, and you see him waver back and forth between various different loyalties the whole book, including his dead family and his previous culture, which is now taken over by the Empire. And it's just a really good time. I have not read this author's first trilogy, although I do own the first audiobook, but I'm very excited to, even though I've heard it's very different and it's more like Wheel of Time than it is like this. But the combination of the anti-imperial feelings with the very intense school setting and the weird stuff happening around the edges, which expands greatly at the very end and makes me very excited for the second book, means that if you like fantasy, you should definitely read this. Next up is The Magician's Daughter by H.G. Perry. I said in a Goodreads status update while I was reading this pretty early on that people are sleeping on this, and it's upsetting because this was such a good time. I would say this is more on the cozy end of the fantasy spectrum, but there is some stuff that happens in it that's intense. So I wouldn't say it's cozy fantasy per se, but it is on the cozier end. It will make you feel warm, cozy feelings of love and family and happiness. There's a chosen family in here that is very satisfying. But basically what this is about is the titular magician's daughter named Biddy, and she washes up on the shore of a magical island called High Brazil when she was about a year old, where this magician, Rowan, and his familiar, a fluffy rabbit named Hutchincroft, take her in and raise her. And she loves growing up on this island. She loves magic. She loves Rowan. She loves Hutchincroft. But she's also starting as she becomes an adult. She's 17 when this book opens. She's getting restless, and she wants to know what's in the outside world. So the main conflict of the book is within Biddy, in that you know, what's home, what's not, when do you stay home, when do you leave, what's good about being sheltered versus like, you know, what's bad about it, what's out there that you're being sheltered from. And there is a big overarching mystery about magic leaking from not coming into the world anymore, and this council of magicians who have really cracked down, and Rowan is their enemy. And so she gets mixed up in that. So highly recommend this. This is my second book by H.G. Perry this year that I was pleasantly surprised by. So I think I need to officially stop being surprised that I like her novels and just anticipate that I will like them from now on, because this was a 5-star book. Next up, Blood Over Bright Haven by M.L. Wong. This is a fantasy / dark academia book about a woman named Siona who lives in this city. What's the name of the city? Why doesn't it say on the freaking book? Okay, I don't remember the name of the city, even though it's really important. She lives in this city that is contained under a magical barrier, a force field essentially, but magical, that protects its citizens from the outside world. And it's meant to be this utopic place, but in reality, it is very much not a dystopian place, but like a place full of inequality / built on inequality from its foundations. So Siona is a woman who has excelled at being a magician, and it is her goal to be the first woman elected to the high magistracy or let into the high magistracy. And she is about to, when the book opens, she's about to test to become a member, and she would be the first woman. So we watch that happen, and she's let in. And then of course her illusions about what this would mean for women, for her, sort of are frustrated and then brought to a crashing halt and toppled completely. And it's her journey over the course of this book that really is the centerpiece. And then another character that's also POV character, but he's got like 25% of the POVs and she has like 75% of them. He is from the outside of the city, and he and his niece are the only survivors of his tribe, who in the prologue of the book are making this mad dash across this frozen lake to get to this city for asylum. And every single one of them, like 40 something of them, die except for Tomil and his niece. And when they're let into the city, they're almost thrown back out until Tomil says he can work, and that he claims his niece as his daughter so that she doesn't get thrown out. So already right at the beginning, like, we're questioning, like, okay, this city can't be that great if it's throwing people out to their deaths. So that is the start of this book, but the main setting is the High Magistracy once Siona is let in, because she's a woman and she's the only woman. The men do not all react great to her presence, and as one of the punishments that they made out to her, they give her Tomil, who is a janitor, as her assistant instead of somebody who is trained and qualified. But little do they know is that Tomil actually is the perfect person to be helping Siona. And their relationship dynamic is fascinating. Anyway, I can't recommend this highly enough. If you are wanting something like happy though, do not read this. This is a book that deals with some really tough stuff: sexism, racism, class inequality. And it does, I mean, Pippin, don't drink my water. It does have a happy-ish ending, but it's very bittersweet ending. It will not make you feel great. So if you're in a fragile place, like if you've read Babel, similar feelings, okay? So if you're in like a bad emotional place, don't read this. But if you're feeling stable and wanting something that's gonna challenge and entertain you, Blood Over Bright Haven. Second to last fantasy book is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Are we surprised that I'm talking about this book? No, we are not. 5 stars, easy. So I don't think I've actually talked about what this book is about though, even though, well, I mean, in my vlog I sort of did, but I was also wishy-washy about it because I just ramble in my vlogs. So it's not, who knows what got through. So this is a book about Yumi and Painter. He has a legal name, but he goes by Painter because he's a painter. And Yumi lives in this very weird, harsh desert world that's very strange and alien to us as a reader and to Painter, where like plants float, the ground is hot, so everyone has to wear like platform shoes or their feet will burn. And the way that their society is run is that people like Yumi practice this art, which I'm not going to talk about what the art is because it would sound silly, not in context. And then through practicing this art publicly, she is able to call forth spirits who are then asked each for an individual favor. And the favor can be anything from like fixing a broken machine, or creating something, or heating something, or providing, like becoming, like there's one that she has in her bedroom that's a lamp. So it provides lighting. So it's literally the way that their society functions. So the people who are able to call forth these spirits are very important and very set aside from the regular population. And one day she wakes up and she is no longer in her body. She is outside of her body in like a ghostly spirit form. And this young man, Painter, is now in her body. And she has to, okay, stop. She has to, I mean, they don't work together at first. They're both very freaked out and non-cooperative, which was very amusing. But eventually they learn to work together. He works to help her in her world figure out some stuff that's going on, and he learns to exist in her world. And then vice versa, when they fall asleep, it's swapped. And because of Yumi's ability, she actually is still in her body. She changes his body to be her body. So she pretends to be his sister on his world, which is dark and full of these creatures called nightmares. And Painter, his job is similar to Yumi's in that he uses art to keep the city safe from these nightmare creatures, because he can use something about the way that the art responds to these creatures, transforms them into something that is harmless. So during all of that, it's a romance, so they fall in love. But there's also something overarching going on that is, I mean, it's a fantasy book and it's a Brandon Sanderson book, so there's always something else going on that you're not aware of when you start it. And that aspect of it was great, but it was just a great time. Everything about it was great. Okay, last fantasy book, although I haven't talked about this one as much because I read it in May, but that is The Adventures of Amina AlSarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, which I'm so happy that she's finally using her full name, that she is a lady. It's so stupid that she had to go by S.A. Chakraborty when she published her first trilogy so that men would buy it. That's never gonna stop being terrible to me. But this is a book about a middle-aged pirate woman who has been retired for 10 years raising her daughter, and due to circumstances, she's pulled back in and has to track down her old crew for one last job, and it goes from there. But it was and it takes place in the Middle Ages on the Mediterranean Sea. So the atmosphere was so great. It was funny. The characters were like, they just popped off the page. It was just fun. It was a great time. Like, it has everything that I want in an adventure fantasy story. It had actual stakes, but it was also fun, but it was also heartwarming. And there was like found family feelings. And I mean, like, look at this. That is the feeling of this book. And I loved it. 5 stars. Okay. So now we're going to go on to other genres. Let's just jump to sci-fi because that's sort of fantasy-ish in the same neighborhood. They're shelved together at the bookstore anyway, which annoys me. That is The Truth of the Divine by Lindsay Ellis. This is the second book in the Numina series. I read the first book 2 years ago, and I owned this ever since then, but I've been waiting on it for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe just because it's intense. But again, can't talk about this specific book, but the first book, which is Axiom's End, is an alternate history science fiction book about first contact, and it takes place in 2007, and it's about what would happen if aliens came to Earth and people found out about it. The main character's name is Cora. She is a young adult. She's like 20, 21. And her father is the most famous whistleblower in the world. Kind of a Julian Assange. God, I can't remember the other guy's name. The one that everyone knows, the WikiLeaks guy. He's kind of like that, except for we learned that he's pretty much a terrible person. He's a horrible father. He abandoned his family. Cora and her family are very fractured. She's definitely had emotional consequences from his abandonment. And not only that, but the notoriety that comes from being the family of somebody who is in exile from the country because of what he did. And he continues to be a shady presence throughout. But Cora is approached by this creature who arrives on Earth, you know, in an asteroid impact. First, people just think it's an asteroid. And soon we learn that he is not the first alien to have visited this planet, but he is the first alien to have made contact communication-wise with humans. And he asks Cora to be his interpreter because it turns out the US government has been keeping the existence of aliens secret for decades, and they've held a group of alien refugees essentially hostage and prisoner in a government facility, and they have not spoken, and they don't know anything about them or their culture. So Cora gets wrapped up in this, and it's just really good brain candy, but it's also serious. This book in particular is less fun than the first book in that it deals with consequences and mental health, and it explores a couple of not toxic relationships, but relationships with troubling power dynamics and codependency issues, all the while the world is like basically on fire because aliens exist. There's some parallels to what's going on right now, big surprise there, with like conspiracy theorists and like fringe groups causing trouble. But I am very excited. They just announced book 3. It's being published next summer, and I've pre-ordered it. If you like sci-fi with aliens in it and like cool technology, but it takes place on Earth, highly recommend this. Okay, let's do romance next. Let's jump. So this one, it was so close to being a 5. I have not actually written my review of this, and I have not talked about it to anyone yet. Hold on. I have not talked to anyone about this book yet because I hadn't been able to formulate fully my thoughts. And despite it not getting a full 5, it is still the most successful romance I've read all year. And that is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. And the reason I say, even though I only gave this 4.5 stars rounded down, is because I have yet to read a romance book this year that gave me as much swoony, happy feelings as this book gave me in the first 75% of the book. So this is about if you've read her previous book, Part of Your World, this takes place in with the same characters. Brianna is the main character. She was best friends with the main character in the other book. And the other main character, Pippin, do not knock over my book stacks. Come on, get down. The other main character's name is Jacob. He has extreme clinical anxiety, but he gets hired to work in the ER with Brianna and she's up for the position of chief of the ER. And all of a sudden, this guy gets put into the running. So they start off on a really bad footing, and that really makes Jacob upset. So he writes her a letter and he starts giving her presents, and then they develop this very cute, unbelievably cute correspondence relationship where they don't really talk in person very much, but they talk by letter, and then they become friends, and just everything about it is adorable. And they eventually get sucked into a sort of fake dating situation that benefits both of them because of various situations. And of course, they actually fall in love. So where this book fell apart for me, and I was so upset when it happened, is that it engages in some of the worst miscommunication trope I've ever seen. Like, I don't hate that trope with no exceptions. Like, if it's done well, I will accept it. But in this case, it was so much. There's this assumption that Brianna makes about halfway through the book with literally no evidence to support it. And everything that happens after that assumption is affected by that assumption. And it is so dumb, and it just didn't need to happen. She had enough baggage emotionally to work through that would have provided more than enough conflict. That just didn't need to be there. It was pointless and frustrating, and it did not make sense because it was not in any way connected to her other issues of like mistrust and intimacy issues. It was just entirely an assumption that she makes that is very wrong and stupid. And it single-handedly brought this book down a star. So just know when you go into this, that part of it is there. And if that's something that you don't like either, you can emotionally prepare yourself, but I can also tell you it is worth it, because they are some of the cutest protagonists I've ever met. And their banter and their relationship and the intimacy emotionally that they develop with each other is so good. I just loved it. So even with the ending being biffed a little, this is still the best romance I've read this year. Now, granted, I haven't really read that many like romances that I expected to love and 5-star, but I had been expecting to 5-star this because I 5-starred the first book in this series, and I just love the whole vibe that it's got going on. So I am disappointed, but also it's still really good. Okay, let's jump. This is not as big of a jump because it does have a romance in it, but it is not a romance book. And it is my sole young adult entry, and that is TJ Power Has Something to Prove. This book came out of nowhere for me. I mean, when it was published, I saw it and the subject matter intrigued me, so I clicked to read, but I didn't go out of my way because young adult books are so hit or miss for me that I wasn't like super anticipating it. So when I just happened to see that it was available at my library and by audiobook, which the audiobook is really great, by the way, I highly recommend it. No complaints whatsoever, just very delightful. I just did it. And it wasn't on my TBR. I just read it randomly. I don't even remember why I decided to do that, but I'm so glad that I did. So this book is about TJ. She's Punjabi. She's Canadian Punjabi Canadian, I don't know. It takes place in Canada, and she goes to this private school with her cousin, and she's on the debate team, and she's very popular. She's very beautiful. Everyone likes her. She has a boyfriend that she loves. He's one of the most popular and handsome guys in school. He's on is it the football team or the soccer team? I don't know. I can't remember. It's not important. Sports. And that's the beginning of the book. That's where we're at in the beginning, is she's got like the ideal teenage life. And then something that happens to her cousin, who's also on the debate team with her, like they're on the debate team together, because TJ is a huge fucking debate nerd, even if she doesn't like advertise that out loud. She's also on the soccer team, and she's really good, but her true love is debate, not soccer, which comes into play later on in the book. But so I forget how this eventually comes up, but somebody plays a cruel prank on her cousin, whose name is Simran. So her cousin's name is Simran. So Simran is Sikh, and she's practicing, and for other various reasons, she has decided not to remove her body hair. And she doesn't really care about makeup or fancy clothes. So she and TJ are very different in that respect. But because of that, she isn't popular, and she doesn't really care that she's not popular. But somebody decides to do something cruel, and they put a picture on social media of TJ and her cousin right next to each other in this like cruel before and after joke, basically, dissing Simran. And a lot of it has to do with her body hair. Like she has a mustache and her eyebrows are overgrown. And this just puts TJ in this place of like transformation, because something about that incident really just sticks with her. And then a further incident with her boyfriend puts it into her head that she's gonna resist. She's not fully aware of why she's doing it. She just knows she's really mad and she wants to do something about it. So she consciously stops removing her body hair. So she has a lot of body hair, and we hear all about it, which was great. So she stops waxing her eyebrows, her face. She stops shaving her legs, her armpits, everything. Nothing, all the hair that she used to remove from her body, she just starts letting it grow. And the plot goes from there. So as you can imagine, this has intense social consequences for her. Nobody really understands why she's doing what she's doing, including her, throughout the book. She just has a feeling that she needs to keep doing it because of what it means in her life, that people were only accepting of her because she was this perfect specimen of femininity and beauty. And there's also issues of race and gender caught up in that, obviously, as well. And what I loved the most about this book was how nuanced it was. Like, a lot of young adult books make the mistake of thinking that their audiences are, because they're young, that they can't understand nuance, but they can. And this book, when you think it's gonna zag, it zigs. And it confronts stuff that I didn't expect it to confront, and it has nuanced gray area reactions to a lot of things that I think other books would have had like a very black and white reaction to. And I cannot recommend this enough. Like, in every form, I gave this book a full 5 stars. I'm probably gonna reread it before the end of the year. And even if you don't normally read young adults, especially as women, men, this isn't gonna apply to you. You can have as much fucking hair as you want and nobody cares. In fact, they celebrate you. Although it would be interesting to read something from the perspective of, body hair is a masculine signifier. So somebody who can't grow a beard, that they might get something out of this. I don't know. That's like the opposite intention. But like, as a Mediterranean genetically person, I had a lot of issues with body hair, especially when I was younger. And this just spoke to me. And I feel like it will speak to a lot of women in particular, even if you are no longer a teenager or a young woman, or, female presenting, or in a female, feminine body, like non-binary people with uteruses and similar hormones, feel like you're gonna relate to TJ, because it's just a universal, it feels really universal to me. Anyway, 5 stars. Okay, let's jump genres again. And we're gonna go to mystery thriller. So first up, I have a cozy mystery. It is a cozy mystery, but it also felt more significant than a cozy mystery normally does. Like, it's not gonna be a series, I don't think. It wasn't formulaic. It was a great time. And that's Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jesse Q. Sutanto, who also wrote Dial A for Aunties, which was one of my favorite books 3 years ago, whenever I read it. The sequel wasn't as good, but it was still a good time. But this book is about Vera, and she owns a tea shop, and the tea shop is failing. She is a widow, and her son is, incommunicado. He isn't as close to her as she would like. So she's a pretty lonely person. She has a very strict routine. And then one day, somebody is murdered in her tea shop, which is also her house because she lives upstairs. And that throws her life into this beautiful chaos. And all of a sudden, she's making new friends. She's getting involved in this murder mystery where she's decided the cops are completely incompetent. She's going to solve it herself. And in the meantime, her way of solving this mystery is to befriend each and every one of the suspects and like mother hen them. So she's like, I'm feeding you and I'm taking care of you and I'm giving you advice and I'm making you feel loved. But also, if you're a murderer, I'm going to call the cops on you. So it was just it was so goofy. I loved it so much. And there's so much food in here. And it's going to make you want food and tea and friendship. And I just loved it. I thought it was perfect. I'm not going to read every single book this author writes because she tends to either lean cozy crazy, which is on this end, like Dial A for Aunties was, or like weird, disturbing thriller. I haven't read any of those books, but she writes any more on this end of the spectrum, I'm there. Very different vibe. Also 5 stars, mystery, thriller, suspense. And that is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. This is S.A. Cosby's newest release. He wrote Razorblade Tears, and what were the other two that aren't his? That was really his breakout. Blacktop Wasteland and My Darkest Prayer. I have no interest in reading Blacktop Wasteland or My Darkest Prayer, but if he keeps writing books like this, I don't know, I might go in and read them, but they just seem like pretty straight up, crime novels. And Razorblade Tears and this one had emotional ends to me that just felt more interesting. But anyway, this book is about our main character, who is the first Black sheriff in this small county in the South, Sharon County, Virginia. and his name is Titus, and he used to work for the FBI. But it's been his goal to like modernize the sheriff's office, bring diversity in, and really be the champion of, you know, the underdogs and the minorities in the community. So he's trying to reform from within, basically. And he's this book, and he is very aware of, you know, the reputation of cops and what comes along with being a cop. And then also dealing with the bad actors in his community, or the people who actively undermine him or do not do what they should do because he's a Black man. And so all of that context goes into the opening of this book, which involves a school shooting that does not turn out to be a school shooting so much as one of the students or ex-students has walked into the school and murdered his old teacher. And this shooting leads to the discovery of an active serial killer in this county that has been preying on young Black men for years. So it was really intense, very intense in every aspect. Like, this was not a calm read. It was not a serene read. It was not, it was disturbing in terms, it's got pretty much every content warning that you could think of is in here. But I was so impressed with the way that the author just threw up all these balls, all of them really complex subjects that deserve nuance, and just juggled them admirably, and then caught them all at the end for a excellent ending and finish. So good. Parents, be warned, especially if you have trouble reading about children being harmed in any way. This is a tough read, but I mean, just look up content warnings before you read it if you're at all sensitive to that sort of thing. So that's my warning. But this is an excellent crime novel. Okay, let's switch genres again. Oh shit! Okay, so you know what I need is I need a mini tripod. Because I have a big tripod, but when I'm like on a surface like this, I need a mini one. And I don't have one right now, so it's on a stack of books and it's precarious. Okay, so 2 more books left, and we've got 2 nonfictions. So first up, these are both just straight 5 stars, by the way, is The Library Book by Susan Orlean. So this one I've been sitting on for a couple of years now. I got it off Book of the Month because I liked the edition, and it was $9. And I knew it was about a fire in the Los Angeles Public Library, but it's also a lot more than that. So using that fire as a structure thing, that's what the book overarching is about. The author also uses that fire to examine how libraries work, why libraries are important, the history of this particular library in California. So it talks about past head librarians, and it talks about the history of women in the profession. And then she also does a little bit of memoir in here about why libraries are important to her and who she meets while she's researching this book. And so just everything about this book was designed basically specifically to appeal to my interests. The true crime aspect, the library, it's about books. It's about the community rallying to save the books. It's about books being in danger, why libraries are important, why books are important, just everything about it. 5 stars. If you want a quick read and you're a bookish sort of person, which I don't know why you would be watching this video if you're not, I highly recommend this one. Okay, and then last up is also nonfiction, like I said, and that is The Transgender Issue by Sean Fay. This is the British version of the book. I'm not sure if it's out in the US yet. I bought it off Book Depository before Book Depository went, and I read it in May, and everything about this was great. This is a very timely topic right now, and I think the author handles it so beautifully. She goes into, I don't even know how to talk about it. She goes into the history of transgender people and transgender rights in the UK. It's a very UK-centric book because she lives there, and she wrote it for people in the UK, because even though it's starting to happen here where trans rights are not being protected, in the UK it's worse, and it has been for a really long time. So it's just a really clear, interesting perspective on the transgender experience and what it means to be a transgender person in a world that doesn't consider you human fully. And like I was just tabbing the shit out of this book. Let me see if I can find a good quote that would be representative of why I'm liking this so much. I think this is from the introduction. Like, anyone who wants to know about transgender issues and be educated on it, this is an excellent book for you to read. This is a book about the transgender issue being taken back into the voices of transgender people and humanizing the transgender issue, which is a talking point in the UK on like nightly news and all that stuff. So she writes, trans people have been dehumanized, reduced to a talking point or conceptual problem, an issue to be discussed and debated endlessly. It turns out that when the media want to talk about trans issues, it means they want to talk about their issues with us, not the challenges facing us. Time and again, when trying to raise the systemic issues affecting trans people's lives, I have found myself frustrated, even silenced. It's not so surprising. At the time of writing, despite the media myth of a powerful trans lobby, in the UK there are no openly trans newspaper editors and no trans staff writers at any major newspapers, no trans television commissioners, no trans high court judges, no trans MPs, no trans members of the devolved legislatures of Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland, and no trans chief executives at major charities. And then there's some stuff parenthetically. This then is a question of power. The terms of the conversation that is happening about trans people are rarely set by trans people. In part because this is because the trans population in Britain is small. Indeed, we don't even have a solid figure for the number. Many people who pick up this book will not, to their knowledge, be in regular contact with a trans person. Human beings rely on familiarity to understand and empathize with others, and we find it easier to extend compassion to those we can relate to. Given that, like any minority, trans people are unfamiliar to the average person. We rely more heavily on media representation, on political solidarity from people who aren't trans and vocal, and ongoing support from public institutions to create the right conditions for understanding and compassion from the rest of society. By the same token, we're especially vulnerable to the spread of misinformation, harmful stereotypes, and repeated prejudicial tropes. And the latter, unfortunately, are widespread in public culture, just as they have been throughout history. Trans people are discriminated against, harassed, and subjected to violence around the world because of deep prejudices that have been embedded into the fabric of our culture, poisoning our capacity to empathize and even to accept trans people as fully human. So that's the kind of writing, that's just the introduction. So she takes it topic by topic and she sort of reframes the trans issue and puts it back, instead of arguing about, are trans people human, what should we do about that, which is where the narrative is right now. She recenters it on what will be helpful, what are the facts, what do trans people need, what is actually happening with this issue, how does it affect non-trans people, really, that kind of stuff. And it is a very activist book. It's actively promoting change that would make people's lives better. It's not just explaining what's going on, it's promoting, asking for change. So, very good. Highly recommend. By the way, if you are a transphobe and you are somehow on this channel, this isn't going to be a safe space for you. Okay, so that is those are my 5-star reads from this summer 2023, ranging from May through August. I read a lot of really good books, but these are my favorites of the summer. Let me know down below in the comments what your favorite reads were this summer. I want to know what your 5-star faves were. And also let me know if any of these have piqued your interest or if you've read any of these, and we can gush together in the comments and be nerds. And I will see you guys later. Farewell.